Hello, everyone, and welcome to another community conversation here on Facebook Live. I'm Mayor Eric Pappenfuss, and today we are going to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement and the recent protests and rallies here in Harrisburg. We've got a great panel of guests. Joining me today are Brent Lipscomb and Kamika Campbell, two of the organizers of the recent marches in Harrisburg, as well as Cole Goodman, a local activist who's been participating in all of these events. We're also joined by City Council Public Safety Chair Asha Green to talk about City Council's perspective and other initiatives that we have planned from a legislative standpoint. I want to begin, however, with some breaking news, and we're a few minutes late this morning. This has already been a difficult morning in Harrisburg in many ways. We received reports last night of a Harrisburg police cadet, somebody who is in the police academy, not yet sworn in as a Harrisburg police officer, who had apparently posted inappropriately online. We investigated those reports, determined them to, in fact, be accurate, and we have had to terminate that officer. The posts were racist and inappropriate and had not been disclosed prior. We have a very strong social media policy at the city, and we asked these questions as part of the vetting process. This was an account that was not previously disclosed and not in that person's name, but nonetheless, we have let that person go, and I hope it will be an example of the swift and decisive action that the city can take, which will not tolerate racism in any form, and especially the airing of those clearly unacceptable views on social media. So that happened this morning. Also this morning I had an opportunity to begin reviewing some of the body camera footage that shows how events unfolded at the rally on last Saturday. If you recall, we discussed a individual with a flag that broke the windshield of the car 219 of the Harrisburg and basically began a chain of events that ended in a lot of violence. That person, who is now a person of interest, we've got fairly good photos, and they're being shared with other police agencies. There is a possibility that we will share them with the public at some point, but right now we've broadened the search to include agencies and other municipalities and other jurisdictions. An arrest has not been made yet, and the person has not yet been identified. However, I can report that 2 arrests have been made, one by the Harrisburg Police and one by the Capitol Police, for individuals involved in the protest Saturday. An arrest was made by Harrisburg Police for the individual that broke the back windshield of that vehicle, which happened after the front windshield was hit by the flag. An arrest was made also by Capitol Police for an individual that threw bricks at Capitol Police. And there are other individuals that have been identified and that the police are currently looking for at this time. So the update, several people of interest, 2 arrests so far, and it should also be noted that I did have a chance to see the flag, and I will confirm that that was an Antifa flag that was used to break the windshield of the police vehicle. Also of note and of interest, the body cam footage and video footage indicates that at least some of the pepper spray, including the pepper spray which was incident there at the corner of Forster and Front, which was much repeated on social media, a portion of that pepper spray was not deployed by police, but in fact deployed by one of the protesters, possibly by 2 of the protesters. We have images of those protesters, and those are also being circulated. So I want to confirm some of those rumors that we've heard about and seen online. So a big day in terms of footage, a lot going on and a lot being reviewed, and we're gonna not let that distract from a conversation about meaningful change and how we can achieve that. But I wanted to give those updates. Also, I wanted to talk briefly about the funeral that I attended yesterday for Tyrone Gibson, a 14-year-old who was tragically shot and killed in Harrisburg. It was a beautiful funeral. We held it outdoors in Harrisburg's Reservoir Park, our largest park. The city helped provide a sound system and work with the family to make sure that proper social distancing could occur. People spread out throughout the park, and it was really a wonderful remembrance ceremony. Tyrone liked poetry. He was an 8th grader at Roland. He was in an after-school program for poetry. He also loved the park. It was one of his favorite places to walk and play. I read a poem by Maya Angelou about great trees and what happens when they fall. Patty Kim spoke from the heart about her faith and beliefs, and Commissioner Carter gave an impassioned plea to the youth. And I would say the majority of the crowd was youth, classmates of Tyrone and others, about turning in the guns and putting down the guns. It was a meaningful and beautiful day, and I have Tyrone's button on now. Also, this past week on Wednesday, as many of you saw, Governor Wolf came out and joined the protests in Harrisburg. We had a chance to march alongside each other for a portion of Wednesday's event, and it has already resulted in a series of actions. The governor announced many different reforms on the state level, including providing technical assistance to municipalities for establishing their own police advisory review boards. And that is something that I know Osher Green and myself are interested in doing here in Harrisburg. So that was a positive development and a sign that these marches are being heard, and that there are real changes which are coming and which are desperately needed and should be coming to Harrisburg. Finally, by way of introduction, wanted to address President Obama's remarks from earlier in the week. Some of you may have seen, and I tweeted that he challenged all mayors throughout the country to review their city's use of force policies and to engage in a community conversation about how they can be strengthened or changed. And this is something that we haven't yet done in Harrisburg, but I'd like to at least begin today. We will make our use of force policy available for review, but I wanted to talk a little bit about my initial thoughts. I had read it before, but reading through it again in light of the recent events surrounding the murder of George Floyd, I gave it another read, and I'm also referring to a website called useofforceproject.org. That's useofforceproject.org, and at that website, which really accumulates best practices for use of force for police departments around the country, there is a discussion of 8 practices which really all use of force policies need to address, that dramatically reduce incidents of police violence on civilians. It's known on social media as 8 Can't Wait, but there are 8 policies. And I can say that in Harrisburg, we address 7 of the 8 explicitly, and one of the 8 is not addressed, but let me explain that a little bit more. The 8 suggestions that are made, first is that use of force policies should require officers to de-escalate situations. And this is addressed throughout the city of Harrisburg's general orders regarding use of force. It talks repeatedly about, here's a quote, when use of force is needed, officers will assess each incident to determine, based on policy, training, and experience, which use of force option will de-escalate the situation and bring it under control in a safe and prudent manner to stop the actions of the aggressor. There is a use of force continuum. There is a graph. There are several admonishments to consider the totality of circumstances, including the level of resistance and basically other language regarding de-escalation. So that is in the city's policy. Can it be strengthened? Potentially, for sure. But on the first look, the policy does address that. The second thing, which the Use of Force Project suggests, is that there be a ban on choke or strangleholds of civilians. And I know this is something that has come up repeatedly, and I can assure you that our use of force policy in Harrisburg clearly says that can't happen and shouldn't happen. So there is a clear directive against using that. There's also, for what it's worth, a clear directive about avoiding what would be considered positional asphyxia, or people losing the ability to breathe while in custody. There's talk of avoiding making sure that people, whether they're being transported or being kept for some time, that they're kept in a position which allows them to breathe. So that is addressed in addition to the ban on chokeholds. There is a requirement which basically says that there should be a restriction on officers shooting at moving vehicles. In Harrisburg, that is addressed throughout the use of force continuum, and it is stated repeatedly that there is a restricted nature, and there's only very limited circumstances in which that is permitted. The use of force project uses the term restrict, on which the city of Harrisburg certainly does, and others, advocates, have argued for a complete and out-and-out ban on shooting at moving vehicles, which is not what the Harrisburg city use of force does, but it does limit the circumstances, and it talks about weighing a whole variety of things, including the potential that it will escalate the situation or potentially negatively affect other civilians. There is a requirement that we have a use of force continuum, and that is something that Harrisburg does, and we've got a graph that shows what it is, and that's a standard best practice, and that's in it. There is a requirement that officers exhaust all reasonable means before resorting to deadly force, and that is in the city's use of force directive. The exact quote is, all other reasonable means affecting the arrest or preventing the escape have to be exhausted first. And there is a requirement that officers give a verbal warning, and that is very much in the use of force continuum. We can talk about what that means and what that constitutes. I will note, in reviewing some of the body cameras footage earlier today, you can definitely hear Harrisburg police officers saying, move, 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 before pepper spray is deployed. Is that a sufficient verbal warning? We can talk about what a sufficient verbal warning is, and I think that's a section of the use of force directive which potentially can be enhanced, but it is nonetheless addressed. And then there's the requirement that officers complete use of force reports each time force is used against civilians, and that is a requirement in Harrisburg, and those are logged. That's 7 of the 8. The one suggestion, best practice, that is not currently in the Harrisburg Bureau of Police's use of force general order has to do with requiring officers to intervene and stop excessive force when they see it. Now, in talking to the police about why this is not explicitly in the general order, the response I received is that it's covered in training, and for the record, there was a recent case in Harrisburg in which, in fact, one Harrisburg police officer did intervene in an excessive force incident involving an officer from another municipality, and that outside officer was charged and convicted at trial recently here on the testimony of the Harrisburg police officer. So it's clearly something which the Harrisburg police embrace and train on, but it is admittedly not in the general order. So that is to begin the conversation. As I say, we will release the general orders so that people can read them and discuss them, and we can hopefully have a much larger conversation about specific types of reforms. And I think that's the type of dialogue that we're hoping to have. Let's start, though, and turn to our guests, because we're really fortunate. We have 3 individuals plus another elected official here who are joining us, all of whom have been very, very active in the Black Lives Matter movement, and specifically right here in the city. And I want to start with Brent because Brent recently reached out to the city on behalf of others after the initial rally that occurred on Saturday and before the subsequent rally on Monday to help work with the city and the police to ensure the safety of the protesters and the ability for those voices to be heard without escalating violence. And we were deeply appreciative of that and deeply appreciative of his efforts to ensure public safety in the midst of getting these important messages out. So, Brent, maybe by way of introduction, you could tell the Harrisburg community a little bit about who you are, what has drawn you to this movement, and what your role has been. And we'll start with that.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for extending an invitation to allow me to come onto the platform to be able to speak on behalf of the Black Lives Matter movement and just giving my opinion and being able to voice concerns of citizens. So definitely, Mayor, I would like to extend a very open and thankful and sincere empathy with you regarding being open to allowing me to come on here. So a little bit about myself. I am originally from Alabama, and I've been living in the Harrisburg area for 2 years now, while working on my PhD in public administration at Penn State University. Now, my background includes working with city officials, from city administrator / director chamber of commerce in Kansas to even working as a director of probation in Alabama through the public-private partnerships. So I've had a great experience of dealing with dealing with individuals that have been neglected or are minorities, and also as well as those individuals that come into contact with the criminal justice system a lot. So what kind of brought me to this movement? As we know, there are a lot of disparities in the Black community or throughout the minority community, should I say, but specifically the Black community. And those issues have been issues for a very, very, very long time that are needing to be addressed, and scholars are always looking for the instruments to use to be able to address those issues. We see our criminal justice system filled with a disproportionate rate of African American males. And being an African American male myself, I always look at these situations and say that could easily be me. So it leaves me with a passion to be able to come to a spotlight to say, hey, we need to address these concerns and issues properly and effectively. And along with my educational background and professional career background, it has given me the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be able to gather the concepts and create a strategic plan to address those issues. Being a member of the greater Harrisburg community and coming into Harrisburg, I just thank the citizens for allowing me to come in and be a representative and take a leadership role and use my responsibilities and advocate for citizens to be able to have a better system and to honestly promote the growth and enhance the city of Harrisburg.
Yeah, Brent, let me follow up because you did something pretty extraordinary in between the first rally on Saturday and the second rally on Monday, which is that I think you recognized the need for a conversation with Harrisburg Police and with myself prior to the second rally to help with an understanding of how traffic control and traffic flow would go. One of the concerns about the first rally was that without clearly identified leaders, the marching in the street basically was unpredictable and unclear to police. And Harrisburg police that started out in not in riot gear and were there to direct traffic were sort of constantly trying to anticipate where the marchers were going, and that brought them into conflict. It did, with the marchers who would see them and wonder why they were there. In order to avoid that, we established a route that was mutually acceptable for Monday. The police were able to sort of stay out of sight, and it went well. But why was it important for you to take that step? And what do you see as the sort of commonalities between the two rallies?
So from my perspective, I think Saturday, I count both rallies as a success. Saturday, while there was some issues we had with law enforcement and etc., I think one important concept from Saturday was it was able to get the officials' attention. It was able to say, "Hey, I'm tired." And as we know, especially people of color, they have been emotionally, physically exhausted from generations of dealing with excessive force and police brutality, racism, inequity, and inequality. So I think it was a strategic plan of saying, I'm addressing this from one way, but then Monday showing you that we're not here to tear up the city. We live here. We love living here, but we do want our voices to be heard. We do want these issues to be resolved, and we do have a plan. And I think at the end of the day, you have to realize that law enforcement will always be law enforcement in America. There will always we will always have a system, a criminal justice system. At some point, we have to work with the criminal justice system, and we have to approach the criminal justice system to have those conversations, which leads us to the next events that we are planning and collaborating with the city to gather the officials there to allow citizens' voices to be heard.
Thank you, Brent. And we'll come back to you and have the second part of this conversation be about where we go from here and what's next. But I want to turn now and bring Kamika Campbell into the conversation. Dr. Campbell is well known in Harrisburg, very active in the community, lives here, and was also a spokesperson, quoted extensively on the recent rallies. Kamika, can you talk a little bit about why it was important, who you are, and why it was important for you to be a part?
Well, I think to echo some of the previous sentiments, thank you for having me here. I appreciate it. It's good to see you. I have been a part of this community for several years. I actually first started being here in 2012, first in Camp Hill and then coming into Harrisburg. In 2016, my husband, Basir Vincent, and I, along with a few other people, formed what is now known as the Young Professionals of Color Greater Harrisburg. So a lot of our work has been within that organization. We are a social and civic-minded organization, and we try to carry out certain initiatives to provide leadership training, support the Harrisburg School District, and create community for Black and Brown professionals in the city of Harrisburg and the surrounding area. So that's a little bit about me. Now the question is, why was this important to get involved? So it was important for me to get involved, I think, because one, we've been involved in other things to uplift in this area, and I saw these protests as a moment of uplift. I see these protests as a moment to get concerns heard that we shouldn't really have to march for in the first place. But if we are going to, if the marching will work, then let's do it. But I saw it as a moment to capitalize on, particularly from the perspective of Harrisburg residents, on some of the things that need to be addressed. And what was interesting about these rallies and the response from the different kinds of police that were there for the few days is that Harrisburg police, the state police and Capitol Police um, acted very differently towards the residents. And Harrisburg is the people city. It is the Commonwealth city, right? It is the capital city. And I think that those protests allowed not just Harrisburg residents, but people from all over the state to come together with Harrisburg residents to make their voices heard on a very important issue. Um, so that's part of the reason why, you know, it's very important to me, being somebody who works in the community, um, both professionally and in the community, doing community work. It was very important for me to be there supporting, you know, my peers, my friends, my coworkers, the city officials that I am friends with and work with. And that's part of why it was important for me to be there.
Thank you. I want to get your perspective on obviously there's much work to be done, and we'll turn to that. But what do you think has already been accomplished through through the marches and the rallies that we've already seen in Harrisburg? I mean, to me, it was an extraordinary moment to see the governor of Pennsylvania out marching through the streets of the city carrying a Black Lives Matter sign and kneeling in solidarity. That's not happening in other states and other communities, but it is happening here in Pennsylvania. I don't want to imply that there isn't an enormous amount of work ahead of us, but what do you think? What do you think has been accomplished so far?
So the first thing that I think has been accomplished is that one is raising awareness. It's not just about these killings that are taking place. It's brought it to a fever pitch, but it's also about community policing relations. So bringing awareness to that in the first place is extremely important. I have not seen a lot of other capital cities reacting in kind of the same way that we have. So that's just that bringing awareness is super important. The second thing that I think has been accomplished is just bringing people together. So bringing awareness and bringing people together. Folks have not some folks have not been able to find a kind of one accord that we've struck in the last few days since Saturday in a very long time, right? Folks are being able to to coalesce around an issue, and then say, what can I do? That's the question I'm getting the most in our inbox, in the Young Professionals of Color inbox, in my personal inbox. Now that I've been affected by this, because folks are affected. Now they're asking, what can I do? And to that, I say, kudos for saying, what can I do? However, I'm encouraging folks to get involved in very different ways. And I can talk about, you know, some of the initiatives we're putting forth to help connect people in meaningful ways to projects around the city and in the surrounding areas. And then the third thing I think that happened is that, so raise awareness, it's brought people together. People are asking what they can do. Also, I think I'm on the fourth thing. But the fourth thing that's happening is that the city officials and the area officials are officially on notice that people want better from their officials. They want better representation. They want better policies. They want fairer policies and more equitable policies in the community. And it's not just around it's a fever pitch because of what we're seeing with community policing, but it's around a lot of other things to do with racial discrimination in housing, in jobs, in business ownership, in a whole bunch of their loans. So we're not, this one issue has kind of brought it to the top, but city residents and folks who work in Harrisburg as well and are connected to Harrisburg want better for this city because of, one, we're the capital city, and because of, two, some of the disparities we know that really affect the city in such detrimental ways. So those are the things I think that are happening as a result of these rallies. It's bringing stuff to the forefront, to the top. It's, you know, stuff is like, you know, coming to the top that we kind of have just been kind of know, kind of slow change on. We've been slowly moving forward. We've been making maybe a one step forward, two steps back kind of progress. So now it's kind of like full steam ahead. Um, and now the question for me is how do we keep the steam? Like how do we use that steam to actually power certain initiatives and be intentional about our work so that we actually create and keep on creating the community that we want to have here in Harrisburg.
Thank you for those thoughts. I think that's extremely well said. And speaking as a public official, I believe that policy has to come from the bottom up. It's never something which should come from a top-down perspective. So if one of the lessons and legacies of this is greater community involvement in on the sort of legislative and policy side of things, I'm very, very hopeful for our future. And we'll get Asha Green's perspective on that in just a moment. And we'll come back and talk about what people can do moving forward. But let me turn now to Cole Goodman, who is another well-known face to many in the central Pennsylvania community. Cole's run for office a number of times, has spoken at many, many rallies, is an active community organizer. But Cole, please also tell us a little bit about yourself, what motivated you to get involved, and then let's get your sort of firsthand perspective as somebody who's been marching right here in Harrisburg.
Sure. So first, I also want to echo, thank you so much for having me on, Mayor, and being on with a great panel. And I'm really excited to have great constructive discussions with you and everyone today. I also want to echo that it really should be said one more time. Both rallies were a success. Now, the Saturday rally, it was a beautiful thing to see so many from our community come out and make their voice heard on something that is affecting African Americans, Black people, and people of color every single day. So I know that there were things that happened at the Saturday rally that both you and I and others on the panel probably do not agree with, but it needs to be said. Saturday's rally was a success. I want to echo some things that Dr. K said. And Councilwoman Green, I'm really interested to hear what you have to say too, because we're not going to get anywhere unless legislatively we see a change. It's just true. And that's why someone gave me the great example of when Dr. King was alive. You saw him at all the marches. You saw him march on Washington. You saw him march in Alabama, but you also saw him up in that White House with Lyndon Baines Johnson, making sure that we could get policies and reforms and laws passed that will affect generations to come. So before I really comment on that point, Mayor, I just want to give a fair chance for Councilwoman Green to talk about what's going to be coming out of City Council. I'd love to hear that more from you as well, Mayor. My experience at the protest, it quite honestly changed my life. From seeing the camaraderie with the community, but from also being someone that was pepper sprayed by police officers, not by people in the, and that was just my experience, but I was pepper sprayed by a cop, man. And I think Dr. K said it best. We really saw the differences in the different police departments in our county and in our capital. I'm one protester that was creating a barrier of space between protesters that were getting in the face of the HPD and the police officers. And I had one HPD police officer put her hand on my shoulder and just say, "Thank you. Thank you." Because we're not out there to hurt police. For anyone watching, be clear. These protests we're not out there to hurt police, but we are out there to demand change and police reform. But on Saturday, when the Capitol Police showed up and the state police showed up, It was an absolute atrocity. I have never seen such a lack of training in de-escalation or in let's just in empathy towards our fellow citizens. And that, I want that to be clear to everyone too, that at that rally, at that protest, I felt that the HPD did an exemplary job, but I have a huge bone to pick with the Capitol Police and the state police. I understand maintaining order, but what I don't understand is seeing a child get pepper spray in her eyes. I don't understand pepper spraying people that were trying to protect you. And that is a very minor example of something that is happening all over the country to the extent of Black men and women getting killed. So again, as I said, in all fairness, I'd love to hear what Councilwoman Green has to say, because we have to have a constructive dialogue while advocating for peaceful protests, but very strident protests. And one more point, and I promise I'm done. For all elected officials, this is a wake-up call, and for all elected officials, you have been put on check. You can see it within these protests. People are demanding change. And honestly, look for what elected officials are there to walk and march with you, and look for ones who aren't. I didn't see our congressman. I didn't see our state senator. Where are they when Black men and women are being oppressed, depressed, and repressed, as well as gunned down and suffocated in the street, calling out for their mothers like George Floyd did? Thank you.
Thanks, Cole, and we'll come back to you here in a minute too, but I do think it's a good segue to turn now to Public Safety Chair and Harrisburg City Councilwoman Asha Green. And Asha, I'll note by way of introduction that City Council made a very vivid and public statement yesterday regarding their solidarity with the protests, and you also made remarks talking about some things that are a priority for you and for City Council. So why don't you, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, everybody, for joining today, for taking the time to have this conversation for everyone to hear. Cole, to your point, some of the things that we're working on getting out of council as soon as possible, because we want to get things out now, but we also want to make sure we keep legislation coming. We want to keep the conversation going. We want to make for sure that it's not a one-shot deal, that something comes out and then nothing else continues. We need to make sure we continue to roll out policy so that continuous change can be made. So that's something we're working on. One of the things that will first be coming out is one, we need to ensure that the generals, they are public right now. We need to make for sure that the use of force policy is public. We need to make for sure that the general orders for our police department is completely searchable. When you go online, it's not completely searchable. So we need to make sure it's completely searchable. Sorry guys, my dog's yiping because my mom just pulled up. But we need to make for sure it's fully searchable. We need to make for sure it's in the order that's listed on the table of contents. When you go on there, everything's not in the complete order. So to make for sure that when our citizens access it, it's clear, it's understandable. They don't have to go searching around for too much. Everything's right there and ready for them. One of the first things we're working on is getting some use of force force reporting available to the public, so that they can go on our city website and find out, how many taser deployments were used this quarter, shots fired, incidents from our police officers, reported injuries while in custody, deaths while in custody. These are things that we need to do to ensure transparency with our policing in our neighborhoods, and ensure that the community can hold our police department and us as public officials accountable. So those are some of the first things that we'll be working on. I'll also be working with the police department to see if we can get some training coordination between the different police departments, especially when it comes to protest on the Capitol grounds, because you have the Capitol Police, you have the state police to come in, and you have the Harrisburg Police Department, who's in charge of ensuring the safety of Harrisburg City. And as you mentioned, there was a contrast between the different policing and de-escalation methods that were used. And so we need better coordination so that when rallies happen, when protests happen, we can ensure the best crowd control so that people can exercise their rights without them feeling like they're being infringed upon, without people being pepper sprayed, without those things happening, no matter who's protesting. Everyone has been speaking about the contrast and the rally that took place a month or so ago, and this current rally that just happened this past Saturday, and the policing with the riot gears and those things. I've spoken with the police department, and I've gotten some different answers as to why this happened, but we need to make sure it doesn't happen. To make it clear that, during the other rallies, there were police and riot gear that were ready to go if it will come to the point that violence broke out. But we also need to make for sure that in those cases that we de-escalate the situations properly, that the first thing that's used isn't pepper spray. We need to have some more coordination with our fellow police departments to ensure that the citizens exercising their rights aren't being infringed upon, or that the situation isn't being escalated due to that. We also need to make for sure that, Harrisburg is the leader when it comes to change. We need to put policies on the books. And then we need to encourage the surrounding communities to follow along as well. I know some of you guys live in different communities, so we need to make sure that we put the pressure on those communities as well. I'm a lifelong resident of Harrisburg. I grew up hearing stories about policing, not only in Harrisburg, but and about surrounding municipalities, about people being pulled over, about people being profiled if they drive through certain communities. And we need to make for sure that we also put the onus on the surrounding communities as well, because just as we can all come to Harrisburg to protest and rally, we need to make sure that the change isn't only happening in Harrisburg, but that the change is being spread out and that we're getting the change all around. So Harrisburg will be the leaders, but we need to make for sure that we keep the conversation going. From City Council's perspective, we'll keep the conversation going by continuously rolling out new legislation to address policing practices, to make for sure that our police practices are transparent, our use of force policies are transparent, the reporting that we get is transparent, and make for sure that it's coming on a consistent basis. So those are some of the things that we're working on. Those are some of the things that we're working on here in Harrisburg, and that Harrisburg City Council is working to put forth. We're also working in conjunction with the administration and the police department for a police advisory or a police review board to ensure that we have that community interaction on a consistent basis. So.
Yes, thank you, Councilwoman, and we'll return to you and maybe talk a little bit about how the public can be involved in that process and what City Council, from your perspective, would like to see in terms of community involvement and input. But just as a final question for this segment, why was it important for you to kneel yesterday and to make the public show of support that City Council did?
I think it was important for us to kneel, but not just kneel, but to kneel together, to show that we as a council, as one voice, are hearing the community. Many of us were at the different protests. I know I was at the protest Saturday. I left, it was peaceful in the beginning. I left, I ended up coming back around 6 o'clock because, a lot of different things had kicked off. And I didn't leave until about 9 o'clock at night. I was at the protest on Monday. I wasn't able to make it to the one on Wednesday because of prior obligations, but just because I wasn't trying to stand in front of the camera, as I know some of my other council members weren't trying to just stand in front of the cameras. We were there to show support. We were there to be a part of the movement, part of the cause. That doesn't mean that we weren't there. And then when it came to kneeling yesterday, it was to show a voice as one together as a city council, not just as an individual, but as a complete city council. So that's why it was important to us to really show our support, to come together, to show that the council, the city, is behind all of our citizens. We hear their cries, we hear what needs to be done, and we're going to make it happen.
Thank you very much. All right, we're going to turn around for a second round here and a final round before we get to public questions. And let's try and focus on where we go from here and specifically what we'd like to see. And so, Brent, I'm going to turn to you and say, where do we go from here? Are there future marches already planned? We talked a little bit about the possibility of a town hall. That's something I'd love to participate in. I will note that we had this very successful funeral in the sense that a lot of people were able to gather safely. The sound projected throughout the park. I think it could be a location for such a forum. The city would love to partner with you and others to make it happen. But what are your immediate plans, and what would you like to see in the short term moving forward for the movement?
Yes, so Councilwoman Green, she made a great point, and it's actually pivotal. We must keep the conversation going. A couple of things that we are planning in collaboration with young people of color. We're trying to implement a recharge day. We know that this is emotionally exhausting. We know that this is physically exhausting. But when we look at policies and we look at American history, we'll see there wasn't just a week protest for policies to be changed. It wasn't 2 weeks. It was an ongoing thing to make policy change. As we know, bureaucracy is a long process, and we must keep our voices active within the community. So first, we're planning a recharge day to kind of allow people to relax, allow people to attain resources concerning emotional support, having pastors within the community to come out and counsel individuals if they're willing to accept, and just having yoga instructors to come out and just give a day of relaxation to recharge, to recover. The second thing that we are planning, which you kind of hit on there, was the town hall meeting. Now I want to talk a little bit about when we say a town hall, what's the purpose of the town hall? The purpose of a town hall meeting is for local and regional officials to hear the community's views on public issues. So what public issues are we searching answers on? Well, we're looking at excessive force, our police reform, and et cetera. We know that this is an issue that has a lot of stems and branches to it, that deals with bias, racism, economic deprivation, lack of resources, and et cetera. But we are trying to tackle these issues one at a time to make sure that they are effective, and we have an effective solution to be able to make sure that we create policies as a unit, and the voices of the citizens are heard, so that we are able to have an effective resolution for these. Our goal is to provide a platform to allow citizens to voice their concerns to be heard, as well as the city officials to be able to hear those voices and make some type of resolution. So our next two events that we are planning would be the Recharge Day, and we are also planning to do another rally, and then we'll have the town hall. So that's kind of our agenda right now. We will be releasing those dates soon. Blake Lynch has been working with myself to orchestrate dates, and he is a part of the city administration. So he's been working with me to orchestrate dates to make sure that we have all of our elected officials there to kind of hear the voices and concerns of the citizens, and the people that have a seat at the table to make effective change within the city of Harrisburg.
Thank you, Brent. Those sound like excellent events, and I'm eager to participate in the town hall and in really all future events that you're putting together. And I'm glad that you're working with Blake and others to develop those dates. I would say that if we're interested in having some of the elected officials that Cole mentioned, who we haven't yet seen, our congressman, for instance, then the sooner we can get dates. I will personally extend invitations as well and encourage them to come and see if we can broaden the conversation to others that maybe haven't gotten the message and haven't heard it yet. So thank you for that. And Kamika, maybe you could talk a little bit about, you were saying that the number one question in your inbox is, what can I do? What can people do?
I think I'm on mute. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
So we're getting a lot of questions as YPOC from folks of the dominant culture. And when I say dominant culture, I do mean folks who ascribe to being white. And they want to know, what can I do? What can I do to help the Black and Brown community? As most of you know, Harrisburg is over 60% Black and Brown. So a lot of folks are asking those questions. And I think it's important to understand that there are things you could do on a personal level, and then there are things you could do on a societal level, and just understanding that the thing you can do first and foremost is work within your sphere of influence. There are people in your life and there are entities in your life that you can affect only being you. So take positions of anti-racism and anti-discrimination and spread those within your sphere of influence. That's the first thing that can be done. Rallies are wonderful. Rallies are bringing us to this fever pitch and bringing certain things to the forefront. But without starting to understand how we influence our personal circles, our friends, our families, and understanding how we work within our spheres of influence to be agents of change and to be agents of anti-racism, then trying to branch out from there is going to be even more difficult. So that's the first thing. The second thing I think that can happen is that we need to start talking about why things get to the fever pitch of a protest, right? Why do people get to the fever pitch of trying to destroy property? What's that about? Let's talk about equity in housing. Let's talk about equity in jobs. Let's talk about equity in community policing. Let's talk about equity in education. Let's start I shouldn't say start talking. The conversations have been had, but what is the action behind these kinds of issues that allow us to significantly move the needle towards a more equitable experience, particularly for the residents of Harrisburg who are minorities. This is a minority majority city. The folks who use up many of the resources, however, are people who are coming from outside of Harrisburg to work in the city. This is a large commuter city with federal government, state government, city government, the hospital, and many other entities that come and take a lot of resources out of the city and take it back to other places. So how do we replenish that and really focus in on the needs of the people that live in the city? How do we make equitable neighborhood voices heard? Not just Midtown, right? Not just the nicer parts of the city limits. How do we get more equitable voicing for Allison Hill? How do we get more equitable voicing for parts of Uptown? How do we do that to help grow and solidify the life experiences that people are having in the city? So that's some things to consider. Next, getting what the YPOC is going to be doing, since we're getting these questions, right? So we talked about working within your sphere of influence. We talked about having these hard conversations around equity. We also want to, be facilitators. The young professionals of color want to be facilitators. So we are currently gathering a list of current projects. We don't want to just point people towards certain organizations without putting our thumb back on the heartbeat of what is actually happening in our community organizations and what they need help with. So we're going to be pulling together, Rob Schoaf and I are going to be hosting an informational after I pull all this stuff together to say, this is what's going on and this is how you can get involved, and then make those meaningful connections so that people can actually put their resources to work to help folks in the city and the surrounding areas with actual projects that will enrich the lives of city residents and area residents who are Black and Brown. And then the other thing that you can do is be an advocate. Protect Black and Brown lives, understand that they are on the margins and what is happening with them, and the experience that they have that may be different from someone who's in the dominant culture, and use your privilege, your power, your placement in order to make a difference and, again, enrich the quality of life for the folks that we know are on the margins and that we know are in the minority. And my personal plug is always going to be for the classrooms of the Harrisburg School District. The Young Professionals of Color, this is our 4th year of supporting classrooms in the Harrisburg School District. We raise money to provide $500 grants for the classrooms so that teachers can enrich the learning experiences of students. So right now, our campaign is going on. It's our Adopt the Classroom 2020 to 2021 school year. And as we know, there are lots of challenges with the Harrisburg School District. It's under receivership right now. There are other things that are happening, but we can still support the students in meaningful ways. And one of the meaningful ways is to provide this support to teachers in the form of a $500 grant. The other thing that we'll be doing also is coordinating volunteer resources. COVID-19 kind of complicates that. So we'll be re-looking at that program for the fall, but we will be coordinating volunteer resources to make sure that the teachers have more support from the community in enriching the educational experiences for students. Because as we all know, the children are absolutely our future. We want to make Harrisburg a place that students want to stay. One of the things that I hear over and over again as I'm working with young people who have grown up here, right? They say, I don't want to stay here. There's nothing for me here. Let's change that for young people of color who will hopefully become young professionals of color and edify their communities in the city. And let's make it awesome for them to be here. So that's my plug. Those are the things I think we can do. And I want to say again, protect Black life, Black and brown life, protect Black and brown art, protect Black and brown voices, Black and brown writing, and literally protect the Black and brown existence for the people that you know in the city, and for those that you don't know. Help them live and experience life in a more full way that is more equitable, that is less discriminatory, and that actually allows them to accomplish some of the life goals that they want to accomplish as people. So those are the things that I think we can do going forward.
Thank you. That's an incredible list, and one that I fully support and endorse. And if I could recommend a book, I feel inspired to do so with your plea. I would recommend Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. It's an important book, and it's one that I think everyone should be reading and discussing right now. I'm going to turn next to Cole, and Cole, can you talk a little bit about what you'd like to see moving forward? Do you have a list of policies that you're calling on others to adopt?
So Councilwoman Green kind of overlapped on many of them, which is a good thing, not a bad thing. I know Councilwoman Green said that the idea is being tossed around for a review board, which I think is incredibly important. But if I may suggest, it should be a review board with subpoena and disciplinary powers, and a review board that is able to recommend criminal investigations per the disciplinary code. Because if you just have a review board, we can talk all we want. But if there's no meat to those bones, then it's just not going to work. The issue of town halls has been raised, and I think that is absolutely wonderful. And Mayor, I am so happy that you committed to being at it. And Brent, thank you for organizing it. That's and it's much needed in this area. I hope that a commitment is that the first town hall on this issue will be held in a predominantly African American part of the city. We can't be holding town halls in Midtown or downtown about police brutality. It doesn't make sense. It actually, I think, deepen or would eviscerate more of the trust that we're trying to sow and the fabric we're trying to build throughout the community. So that's one suggestion. And Mayor, specifically to you, I think one thing that you may have been vocal on, but also would be great for you to be vocal on, is really pressing the governor to create this deputy inspector general that's focusing on deterring, detecting, and preventing and eradicating misconduct and brutality in police forces across the state. I know that you're our local official, but as the mayor of Harrisburg, you definitely have a huge megaphone across the state. And I know the governor listens to you. And I think that's something that shouldn't even considered or should be under consideration. That needs to be done. It needs to be done. My final point would be an idea of quarterly public statements on the status of police misconduct. This can go, I think, correspond with the town halls, and I understand that the city's website and the city is about to make that public, but residents need to be told too. I understand that a bottom-up approach is important, but a top-down one is also important. And we have to strive to make sure every resident in the city, but also in the surrounding areas, are hearing how our police departments are really combating this. This is, I just also want to say, Mayor, you touched on how the city is considering creating, excuse if I don't know the word, an ordinance or a code that if another officer is there when police brutality is happening, that he or she should jump in. I think that needs to happen because how can we tell our kids to stand up to bullies and to protect people who are being victimized and bullies if we don't tell our law enforcement to do the same thing? So I don't think that it should be a consideration. I think that really needs to be done. And Mayor, I'm really glad that you brought up that council and the administration is thinking of doing that.
Yeah, thank you, Cole. So yeah, we're talking about the general order on use of force that the police have, and it's an order which is written and it guides their actions. And this is something that I'm happy to try and lead the discussion on. And it's exactly what President Obama was saying should happen. What I was saying is that of the 8 recommendations that have been made by the Use of Force Project, 7 of them are currently in the written order, and the written order is silent on the 8th, which is the point you're bringing up. So it's a straightforward thing to add that. But I want public engagement. I want people to read it. I want people to talk about it. I brought up other nuances such as restrict versus ban, and in other types of language, what constitutes a verbal command. This is the discussion that we need to have, and it's a serious one. So. After this Facebook Live, I will make it a point to sort of release not only that general order, but also a sort of written response to the 8 Can't Wait. And hopefully people will give us their feedback, and we can have a public conversation about how to improve it. As for the rally, I know Brent from the beginning was thinking about Reservoir Park and for the town hall, and that's something that I support. Certainly being right in the heart of Harrisburg, I think it'd be a good location. Also because it's outdoors, which will allow people to spread out. So I don't think we're considering an indoor event under any circumstance. So thank you for those suggestions, Cole. I also believe the governor's endorsed the inspector general, and he did that in response to the rally in Harrisburg by his own words, that speaking to leaders here and listening to the crowds, he came out the next day and endorsed exactly what you're suggesting, which to me is a sign of just how much progress in a short period of time we're making towards better policy on all levels of government. But I'm going to give Asha Green the last word. And Asha, I know one of the things that sometimes it can be a disappointment to elected officials is that there are not that many people who are sort of coming out to city council meetings or public safety committee meetings, and it's sometimes difficult to get people involved in the hard work of making legislation and policy. Maybe that's changing, and we certainly hope that that is. But do you want to address how people can get involved if they're listening to you and they want to weigh in on an advisory board or on changing general orders? How do they do it?
One of the easiest ways to do it is to get involved in our city council meetings. We always have a public comment section. We do listen to our public comments. We respond to those who make a public comment, whether it's an issue to address, whether it's reaching out from about concerns that they've had. Something that I vow to do, and I hope that the other council members and even the mayor would participate in as well, as I vow to put time aside each month and create something like maybe a doodle poll or some sort of platform where people can schedule, especially community leaders, can schedule time to sit down and talk to me about different issues where we can work on policy around issues, because we're talking about police reform, but it's systematic racism isn't one issue. We need to address it in housing and policing and socioeconomic ways, and equity in parks, making sure we have enough open space for all of our communities. But in order to really make the change, we need to have the discussion with the community and with community leaders who are organizing the community. So I'll be putting out a doodle poll or some sort of platform where people can schedule time to sit with me. I'll invite my other council members. I'll invite the mayor to speak on some of these issues and get involved with the community. Another way for city council to do it and for all of us to do it is to make the conversation public. Thank you, Brent, for organizing some town halls. I would love to participate in those. I'll make for sure I put my personal cell phone number in the chat feature. It's also having the conversations on social media, during public comments at our meetings. It's also about making our voice heard at every level. It's filling out the census, it's going out to vote, it's rallying behind candidates that represent values that you identify with, and ensuring that those are the people who get into office. It's talking about the issues. It's talking about them constantly. It's not talking about them when you have a camera in front of your face. It's not talking about them when you think you're going to get some likes on social media. It's talking about them in public. It's talking about them in private, talking with friends and family, talking on social media. Every time you get the chance, talk about the issues, not about the protest, because a lot of times the narrative gets changed and the conversation becomes about the protest, when the protest didn't come because we were sitting around bored and there was nothing to do. The protest came because it was an issue that needed to be addressed, that the people felt wasn't being addressed. So we need to use this moment and platform to speak out about the issue, and not let the narrative get changed. It's about everyone taking the time to educate themselves on the issue and on the process. It's a process to make change happen. You have to keep the energy going. You have to get involved even behind the scenes, even when the spotlight's not there. You have to put the work in and keep the pressure up to make sure the work gets done on every level. It's joining organizations that keep the conversation going. And it doesn't mean you just have to join an organization about one issue. You can join an organization that's speaking on issues that you find important. If your lane is education equity, join an organization that's talking about that. If your lane is police and community policing, join an organization on that. If your lane is housing reform, join an organization on that. Talk to local officials and people over those departments to get change in those levels. It's getting the youth involved in every facet of the process, not just taking down a protest because it's something to do on a Saturday, but it's getting them involved in the entire process, teaching them how legislation moves, teaching them how to reach out to public officials, how to send emails, how to do the entire process, because the youth are our future and we need to make for sure that they can keep it going as well. So it's getting involved in all of that. It's also making sure our youth have the ability to take advantage of the opportunities that are available in their local communities. I know about many free training programs that are available to youth in our communities. I know about job readiness programs, but all sorts of organizations available, and free programs available to our youth that when I talk to people, and even in personal experience with some organizations I've worked with, they have trouble recruiting. And so it's making sure that our community leaders are helping to get our youth involved in some of those activities as well. And I will reach out to you guys. If you give me your contact information, I'll let you know about some of these opportunities that are available even over this summer through Harrisburg University, through the workforce development boards, through all sorts of organizations that'll give our kids an opportunity to gain some more knowledge over the summer and participate in some activities. So it's being involved in every facet that we can be involved in, and understanding you don't have to be involved in every lane, but it's finding your passion and making change through that. So.
Thank you, Councilwoman Green. I think that's a great note to end our conversation portion today. I appreciate everyone's comments. I'm very encouraged. On a personal note, if individuals would like to reach out to me, I have an open door policy. I will meet with anyone on any topic. I just request that we have an opportunity to schedule it. And you can do that by emailing me at mayor@harrisburgpa.gov. And if you don't have access to email, you can also reach our office by calling 311 and asking to make a time to sit down with me and talk. I'm looking forward to all of the various initiatives we've discussed today. And Momin, this is just the beginning of a conversation, but I imagine we've had some comments there on social media. What can you relay?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We've had a great discussion online as well at our Facebook Live comments area. First question we can direct towards Councilwoman Green. This is from Cornelius Johnson. Money was allocated for pilot police cadet academy through CDBG funds that was targeted at recruiting residents of the city, particularly those leaving our high school, and providing them with an internship with the police department and funding for a tuition at HAC. What is the status of that pilot?
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. The status of the pilot is right now, the money is not available to be used in that facet. CDBG money has to be used appropriately. We can't use it in any way that we want it to. And the police department found out that they weren't able to use that money to support that program. So as of right now, there aren't the funds to do it. I look to work with our police department, our mayor and administration to see about what other funding options we have, even if it's working through other organizations, working through workforce development dollars to provide these opportunities to our youth in the city. I think it's very important because we need to get our youth in the city involved in the policing component so they can police their own communities. It's a great career opportunity. It's a great career path that a lot of them don't take advantage of, and a lot of them don't feel like they have the opportunity to take advantage of it. So we need to change that narrative and get our communities involved.
Thank you. It's Cornelius Johnson, former council member here for Harrisburg, currently residing, I believe, in Atlanta. I hope you're safe, Cornelius, and well. I will say that while CDBG money may not be eligible to play for that program, it's money well spent and is something that we can certainly do from the general fund. Just as a reflection on recruitment, which I know is an issue, something that we can talk about in future forums and at future times is how we recruit police officers of color and get that message out amidst the larger conversation about policing. It's very difficult. I can tell you from Harrisburg's standpoint, we're not turning away minority applicants. We're not getting minority applicants. So how do we do that? And I think objectively, some watching the rallies, maybe getting the message, which is that policing is not a career that they want to go into. So how can we bridge that gap? And we'll make that a conversation as we move forward.
Okay. And we have time for just a few more, but We have a comment here from Teresa. She's appreciating all the speakers, so we do appreciate all the show guests that are on. A question that she and Hanil are asking are about the police protective gear. Regarding Saturday, who approved the deployment of that gear? We'll start with that question.
Okay. So Harrisburg police have personal protective gear. They were not wearing personal protective gear at the start of the rally. In fact, if you look on social media and you see the pictures of the Harrisburg police officers, they are in regular uniforms. They were primarily there to direct traffic. That is Harrisburg's role. We talked about overlapping agencies. Each of these agencies have a different role. The Harrisburg Police Department's agency and jurisdiction really lies in the streets of our city, not the Capitol or the Capitol steps or the Capitol complex. That's where the Capitol Police is. Our job is to help keep both the protesters safe and the residents of the city safe. And a lot of that is traffic control. And in reality, and I know there's been a lot of discussion about comparing, say, the reopened PA rally with the rally that happened here last Saturday. In both instances, Harrisburg police were doing the same thing, which is directing traffic at first. I can also tell you those officers that, so they carry protective gear in their vehicles. And I can tell you when I went to inspect the vehicles that had been damaged by the bricks and the other aspects on Saturday, that gear was still in the vehicles. It hadn't been ever taken out or utilized by those particular officers. The protective gear first came out when the Capitol Police came to help extricate the Harrisburg police officers. We don't need to go over that all right at this time. But the bottom line is the police do have protective gear. That was not how things started out. It did end up with a number of different forces. We also had police, we didn't discuss this, we also had police from the surrounding municipalities coming into the city, Swedera, Lower Paxton. You also had activities by police on the West Shore, closing points of access to the city and other things. There's much to discuss and talk about, but just on the issue of protective gear, perhaps that answered it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mayor. And a follow-up to that, this is from Hanil. Why did the city give the local police departments funds for this gear several years ago when citizens opposed it?
Well, that is a reasonable question to ask. I would say that it's not, in my opinion, the gear itself. It's how police officers are trained and how they act with the gear. There are situations, especially in a capital city, where all manners of protests can get out of hand. We've had, the KKK. We've had all sorts of groups protesting on the Capitol steps, and our officers need to be able to protect themselves in the event of a riot or things branching out. They also need to be able to protect the public and the protesters. So, is it the gear or is it how the gear is utilized? I'm willing to have that conversation. I'm not stating definitively, but I believe it was the consensus of the city's elected officials that they should have that gear and that gear should be funded. It's really more how it's utilized than whether or not they have it. Every department of the country has it, but departments in the country are using it and deploying it differently.
Okay. And Mayor, I think we have time for one more question, but perhaps other questions we can discuss at the upcoming town hall.
Sure.
That is coming. So one more question here from Danny. Will the city hire social workers so that trained mental health workers can respond to crises instead of armed police?
Yeah, so that is, I understand what the question is asking. I'm not sure trained mental health workers are able to respond in all situations, especially situations that are violent or that have weapons. There is a relationship between the police and social services. There is a lot of cooperation already occurring. I understand what he's talking about, which is how can we de-escalate situations? How can we get people the help that they need in a way to basically replace police from playing that role? And that's a good, larger conversation to have. It's going to require a lot more funding for that type of work. Right now, police get calls for every type of domestic or other disturbance that you could possibly have. And a lot of it is better in the domain of social workers and other social service advocates, and how you sort that out and how you make sure that the right people are there is something that is difficult to do in a time when more and more is asked of the police and less funding is going to social services. So, Danny, I think your question is a good one and something that we can talk about more moving forward.
So that's all the time for questions that we have, but we can address these.
Yeah,
at a
what we'll
future.
do is we absolutely will. We'll keep a list of them. We'll share them with Brent and the group. We'll try and answer some of them online, and we can use them as part of the conversation for the upcoming town hall. So with that, I want to say thank you to all the guests that volunteered to be a part of this today. This is just the beginning, of a conversation which is going to be occurring in every household throughout the country. And I hope all those watching found it as interesting and informative as I did. Again, this is Mayor Eric Papenfuss. Thank you for tuning in for our community conversation. We're going to be on every Friday at noon. And we will see you again next week for Community Conversations on Facebook Live.